man can do what he wills, but he cannot will what he wills. Arthur Schopenhauer. Determinism. Determinism, in philosophy and science, the thesis that all events in the universe, including human decisions and actions, are causally inevitable. Every action or delusion of decision we make is driven by our biological instincts. Each desire we believe we've acted upon is rooted in our survival instinct. Even the decision to commit suicide stems from the belief that death may offer relief from pain and suffering, suggesting that the desire to alleviate suffering is itself a direct expression of this instinct. In this context, death is perceived as the only means to survive the pain of one's current state of living. Similarly, the sexual desire to procreate, which often drives many of our choices, decisions, and actions, is also a direct manifestation of our survival instinct. This desire takes the form of passing on our genes to extend our lives through future generations. Rationality. Some claim that if determinism is true, we must abandon the legitimacy of reason. However, we can observe that rationality is merely an expression of biological drives aimed at achieving specific goals and desires. The illusion of agency or free will is nothing more than the result of biology directing your actions, which you then misinterpret as choice, decision, or free will. Just as we interpret sensory stimuli and the resulting experiences or qualia as indicative of a self, soul, spirit, or consciousness, the perception of free will can also be misleading. A direct example of how our reason is grounded in determinism can be seen in the arbitrary whims and inconsistent justifications that many people use to deceive themselves. These irrational justifications serve as coping mechanisms to manage biological desires and drives, despite the potential social, cultural, familial, and religious condemnations, restrictions, or shame that may arise. They illustrate that an individual's ability to exercise reason is itself rooted in determinism rather than in any independent free agency. If rationality were not simply an expression of biological drives, why would individuals self-deceive or accept any irrational justifications, despite this alleged transcendental rationality? This is why rationalization in psychology is considered a defense mechanism. Individuals justify their thoughts, feelings, or behaviors with seemingly logical reasons instead of confronting the true, often uncomfortable motivations behind them. Some argue that the decision to make a chess move demonstrates that our rationality overrides the determinism argument, explicitly claiming you could have done otherwise. However, one needs to demonstrate that we actually could have done otherwise. This is an impossibility. Not meaning that there isn't an alternate, potential move you could have made, but that making this alternate move would demonstrate that the decision was not determined. 2. That rationality itself is not determined by our biology. Both are impossible to demonstrate, and simply begging the question of free will. Some argue that if rationality is determined, then determinism itself could not be accepted as true, nor could arguments for it be considered valid. However, this argument assumes essentially begging the question that if determinism is not inferred from free reasoning, outside of deterministic judgments, it cannot be accepted as valid. Yet, if our reasoning and judgments are indeed deterministic, then these faculties are not the arbiters of what should be accepted as true or valid. This could verify and validate the truth of determinism without relying on our faculties of reason. Thus, this line of reasoning presupposes that truth can only be derived from free reasoning. Nevertheless, we cannot know or validate this assumption if reasoning itself is inherently deterministic. Another claim posits that the rational mind must be outside of the causal nexus if the legitimacy of rationality is to remain. However, if reasoning must derive from data, information, or experience, then it cannot precede this input. It must be a reaction or calculation based on and thus following the input. Consequently, it remains within this causal nexus. Alternatively, if one claims that the rational mind causes actions, it would need to precede and not follow the action, yet it would still be entrapped within this causal framework.